OnlyFans grew to $4.9 billion in valuation. Creators called it the fastest way to earn real money. The platform solved something nobody else had: direct payment from fans to creators. No gatekeepers, no algorithms, no permission. By 2021, OnlyFans was processing over $2 billion annually. Then, in August 2021, the company announced it would ban the content that built the entire platform. 5 days later, they reversed it. But here's what matters. They reversed it not because they changed their mind. They reversed it because they had no choice. And that one moment, that forced reversal, revealed something fatal underneath. OnlyFans didn't actually control OnlyFans. Before the crisis, OnlyFans looked like the answer to a problem that had plagued creators for years. YouTube took 45% of ad revenue, Twitch took 50% of subscriptions, Patreon took 5% and added friction. OnlyFans did something different. They took 20%, and creators kept 80%. That was extraordinary. Tim Stokely, the founder, didn't invent a new payment technology. He invented a new permission structure. He said, "Your relationship with your audience is yours alone. No algorithm, no content rules, no disapprovals. Just you, your fans, and the money." By 2018, OnlyFans was processing $500 million annually. Creators moved in: models, musicians, fitness coaches, teachers, artists. Anyone who had an audience moved in, and they stayed. The platform was working. Here's what nobody talked about while OnlyFans was growing. OnlyFans didn't actually own the infrastructure that mattered most. The company took 20% of money flowing through the platform, but the money itself, the actual movement of billions of dollars, that was controlled by Mastercard and Visa, and by the payment processors who handled the actual transactions. OnlyFans had built a $4.9 billion company on someone else's rules. For years, that worked. Mastercard and Visa don't look closely at every merchant. The rules are written in broad language. As long as OnlyFans stayed quiet about what content creators were actually making, the money moved fine. But by 2021, OnlyFans couldn't stay quiet anymore. The platform had become too visible. Reports were mounting. Regulators in multiple countries were asking questions. Sex trafficking allegations emerged. The UK government was drafting the online safety bill specifically with platforms like OnlyFans in mind, and Mastercard noticed. They issued an update to their prohibited merchant list. It was 450 pages long. The relevant section was short. Adult content services are high risk. Payment processors who work with adult merchants need new approval structures. Verification is harder. Chargeback liability increases. Risk increases. For a platform that processed billions in adult-adjacent content, that change in policy wasn't a detail. It was a death sentence waiting to happen. On August 6, 2021, OnlyFans made an announcement that shocked the creator economy. The platform said it would ban adult content. No sex work. No explicit imagery, no adult creators. Within hours, the internet erupted. Creators who had built audiences of millions on OnlyFans realized their entire income stream was about to be cut off. Some had quit their day jobs. Some had built full companies around OnlyFans revenue. Now they were watching the platform ban the content. The platform's stock price didn't move because OnlyFans was private. But if you could have seen what was happening internally, you'd have seen panic, because the creators didn't understand what had really happened. Mastercard had issued an ultimatum. The payment processor told OnlyFans, "If you don't implement serious restrictions on adult content by a specific date, we will stop processing payments." And without Mastercard, without Visa, without any payment processor willing to touch the platform, OnlyFans couldn't process a single transaction. OnlyFans was being forced to choose between staying alive as a company or staying true to the creators who made them what they were. They chose the company. For 5 days, creators protested. The backlash was immediate and total. News covered it. Creators announced they'd migrate to competitors. Patreon saw a surge in creator interest. Kick, a new competitor from the company that owned Rumble, suddenly became an option. OnlyFans realized the ban couldn't hold. The creators would leave. The revenue would vanish. And if they lost their creators, the whole platform became irrelevant. On August 11, just 5 days later, OnlyFans announced they were reversing the ban. But here's what's crucial. They didn't reverse it because they found a solution. They reversed it because they had no power left. Mastercard still didn't want them. The payment processors still considered them high risk. OnlyFans just admitted defeat. They brought back the content that the payment processors hated. They brought back the revenue that kept them alive. And they went back to hoping that the payment processors wouldn't follow through on their threats. That wasn't a victory. That was a reprieve. After the reversal, OnlyFans pretended everything was normal. The platform was back to processing adult content. The creators were staying. Revenue was flowing again. The crisis was over. But it wasn't over. It was only beginning, because the August announcement revealed something that every payment processor, every regulator, and every banking institution now knew. OnlyFans couldn't say no. The platform was entirely dependent on adult content revenue, and that dependence was their vulnerability. Mastercard didn't drop the issue. If anything, the attention intensified. Regulators in the UK were moving faster on the online safety bill. US legislators were starting to ask questions about sex trafficking on the platform. Banks that processed OnlyFans' corporate payments were starting to get nervous about the association. By 2022, payment processors started implementing new restrictions anyway. Slowly, quietly, Stripe dropped support for OnlyFans payments in some regions. Paxum, which OnlyFans relied on for backup payment processing, implemented stricter creator verification. The infrastructure that OnlyFans depended on was silently being pulled away. The company tried to diversify revenue. They added subscription tiers. They rolled out NFTs. They experimented with safer creator verticals. But the math didn't work. 85% of creator earnings on the platform came from adult content. The other 15%, music, fitness, education, couldn't replace it. Meanwhile, creators started to panic. They'd already lived through the threat of a ban once. Some of the biggest earners on the platform, the ones generating millions annually, started diversifying their presence. They built Discord communities. They moved to subscription services. They created backup accounts on competitor platforms. OnlyFans' monthly active users plateaued in 2022 and started declining in 2023. Creator signups slowed. The number of new creators jumping into the platform dropped sharply. Growth, which had defined OnlyFans for 5 years, simply stopped. By 2024, the cracks were impossible to ignore. OnlyFans was still profitable, still processing billions. But the company that was supposed to be the future of creator monetization was now in survival mode. And the core issue hadn't changed. OnlyFans still didn't control the infrastructure that defined them. They still depended on Mastercard, still depended on Visa, still depended on banks that were increasingly uncomfortable with their business model. The last mistake OnlyFans made wasn't in August 2021. The reversal wasn't even a mistake. It was a forced move. The real mistake was earlier. The mistake was building a multi-billion-dollar platform on someone else's infrastructure, then realizing too late that the person who owned the infrastructure had their own rules. Here's the final layer of what makes this a structural failure, not just a strategic mistake. OnlyFans succeeded because they solved a real problem. Creators wanted direct access to fans, unfair payment cuts, and autonomy. The platform gave them that. The model worked. The growth was real, but the model depended on one hidden assumption, that there would be no consequences for monetizing content that every major financial institution considered risky. This wasn't a secret. Tim Stokely knew from the beginning that OnlyFans would be touching content that Mastercard and Visa classify as high risk. Every payment processor he relied on had documented policies about sex work, explicit imagery, and adult services. He knew the rules. The bet he made was this: if OnlyFans grew big enough and fast enough, if they became important enough to the creator economy, the financial institutions would have no choice but to support them. Necessity would override policy. The system would bend. It didn't. Instead, the system pushed back hard. And when it did, OnlyFans discovered that you cannot build a multi-billion-dollar company on a foundation you don't control. You can't build a creator platform dependent on adult content without controlling payment processing. You can't monetize regulatory risk without having regulatory power. And you can't assume that scale alone will solve structural fragility. Every other major creator platform learned this lesson before building to billions of dollars. Patreon built strict content policies from day one, so regulators would trust them. Substack controlled payments through Stripe, but positioned themselves clearly as a creator platform, not an adult platform. Even Twitch, which has massive content moderation challenges, invested billions in compliance infrastructure and worked proactively with regulators rather than hoping the rules would change. OnlyFans did the opposite. They grew on the assumption that they could outrun the rules. By 2024, that assumption is dead. The company still exists. It still processes billions. But the vision of OnlyFans as the inevitable future of creator monetization is over. The platform is now a mature, stable, profitable business that serves a specific market and faces constant structural pressure that it will never fully escape. That's the last mistake OnlyFans made. Not a decision, not an announcement, a bet against the nature of financial systems, regulatory power, and structural control. And they lost. OnlyFans is a specific story, but it reveals something broader about how companies are built in 2024. The most dangerous companies aren't the ones that make bad decisions. They're the ones that build on infrastructure they don't control, then assume they're too important to fail. Uber built on car ownership laws they couldn't change. Amazon built on logistics infrastructure it did control, which is why they survived when others didn't. Tesla built on government EV subsidies, which is why they fought so hard when those subsidies came under threat. OnlyFans built on payment processors they couldn't influence. Scale doesn't make you untouchable. Control does. The mistake that OnlyFans made was the same mistake that many fast-growing companies make. They looked at short-term dominance and called it structural security. They looked at creator loyalty and assumed regulatory power would follow. They looked at rapid growth and assumed it would protect them from the institutions that actually controlled the flow of money. OnlyFans is still here, still processing billions, but the company is no longer a threat to the old system. It's part of the system, and the system is designed to keep it stable, limited, and predictable. That's what happens when you build on someone else's foundation. You might grow bigger than anyone expected, but you never truly own what you built. You've watched Triumphs and Troubles. Subscribe to the channel for true business stories and comment, which company should we cover next?